There's a boom in regional Australia as our ability to harness the power of wind, sun and water accelerates. The shift to renewables is gaining pace as the country ambles towards net zero.
There is a very rapid change now from coal to solar and wind. The solar and wind farms are not in the same place as the coal power stations, so we need new transmission.
The missing piece of the puzzle, power lines, not popular with everyone.
You can't pay us enough. Transgrid and the government could not pay us enough money to host this power line. And we will defend our land and we will fight.
In central West New South Wales, the benefits of renewables are already being felt.
These have been really important in the last few years. They've helped us get through the drought, and up until just recently, they've been our only source of income.
Simon Barton's farm is just outside Wellington. Through the drought, the wind turbines were a saving grace, allowing him to keep the breeding stock his family had built up over 50 years.
I think the tide has turned a little bit, and now that we've got one here and it's operating, there are no negative impacts, and people can see the benefits that are going into the community and the renewable energy that we're creating. So things are changing around here.
Just down the road, a massive solar farm has brought a flurry of construction to town, with more on the way.
I have found that it has actually brought long-term employment, not necessarily in the volumes during the construction, which is hundreds of contractors, but if you look at the Badangra wind farm, there is approximately 12 full-time jobs there, and I think with the solar farm there will be more.
Farmer and Deputy Mayor Anne Jones sees the potential the shift to renewables will have for her community.
It's not just drought, it's fires and floods and all the other disasters that we've actually gone through in the last 3 to 5 years. Particularly, it gives them the income that they need to in fact be able to plan for the future. And
there's more to come, with this region set to be the first renewable energy zone in New South Wales, as the state government plans for a renewable future.
The Renewable Energy Zone is like a modern-day power plant. It's a combination of solar, storage, wind and transmission infrastructure. It's the first time that there's been a coordinated build of transmission plus those solar, wind and storage projects. And what it's going to enable us to do is create 3 gigawatts of energy that will be in the Central West and bring massive amounts of private investment into the region and enable more energy, clean energy, to flow back into the grid to where it's needed.
Investment into the renewable energy zone has already begun, with solar and wind projects proposed and under development across the region. To connect the zone to the grid, transmission company Transgrid has proposed a new high-voltage line across the Merriwa-Cassilis Plateau through large tracts of prime agricultural land.
They want to come through here because it's supposedly cheaper and easier across the plateau. To be quite frank, it won't be easier.
Farmer Peter Campbell is among a large group of landholders opposed to the line.
We acknowledge that there is a transition, but what we're saying is the line needs to go in the right place. There'll be no net benefit to us. We were sold a line at one of our working groups that we will get $140 off our energy bill. That's a bitter pill to swallow for landholders that are going to host an 80-metre wide easement across their property and not be compensated properly for it.
At the southern end of the state, farmers are facing a similar prospect, as Transgrid looks to build 360 kilometres of new line to connect Snowy 2.0, called HumeLink.
We actually got the letter from HumeLink, Transgrid, that they're coming through with bigger power lines. So this is sort of fairly devastating, gut-wrenching actually. The old girls are even looking good too.
Andrea and Paul Sturgis's farm near Batlow was devastated by the Black Summer bushfires. The couple run cattle here, as well as harvesting eucalyptus oil. With little income since the fires, they had planned to build holiday cabins, but the proposed lines would go directly over them, putting those plans on hold.
We will lose either way, whichever the way they come over that line there, we're probably going to lose a lot, like our distillery, our home, the garden, everything. If we are hoping that it's going to be on the Batlow side, which is the western side, we still will lose the cattle yards. It's really consumed our lives. You can't sort of do anything because you just don't know whether it's going to be here, but your feeling is just, anxiety.
When farmers host wind turbines or solar panels, they're paid a substantial annual fee. In some cases, their neighbours are also compensated, and energy companies start up community funds so that those not hosting the projects directly can also benefit. In comparison, the law in most states only allows transmission companies to make a one-off payment to landholders that many believe doesn't accurately reflect the true value of the land. And the rules allow for compulsory acquisition.
The transmission companies are strictly bound by these rules that are outdated, archaic, are simply not working.
Researcher Andrew Blakers believes the whole system needs an overhaul.
We have rules for the construction of new transmission that was fine for coal power stations several decades ago, but is absolutely not fine for solar and wind.
We understand that landholders would prefer a different process of payment rather than an upfront capital payment, and we're supportive of investigating and working with the New South Wales Government on those proposed changes.
Transgrid engaged an independent expert to review their community engagement and have taken on all 20 recommendations.
We will continue to improve that engagement as we go about all of the major projects.
But farmers told Landline they were still unhappy with the consultation process, and even with compensation, they'll have an uphill battle.
We've deliberately not talked about compensation. You can't pay us enough to have a compensation conversation.
Those impacted want all other options on the table, including undergrounding and using public land and existing easements.
What we're actually fighting them with is to give us an even playing field against public land. It should be put out into public land. We've got enough state forest, we've got enough natural park.
But farmer and renewables consultant Karen Stark disagrees.
I do think transmission should go through agricultural land because it's already cleared. If we were to put it through national parks or travelling stock reserves or state forests, that's huge amounts of biodiversity that we then have to remove. What we need to get right is the compensation for those farmers and understanding the impacts of having those easements on their properties.
If Australia wants to reach net zero by 2050, Andrew Blakers says the federal government needs to do more to connect renewables.
We need to accelerate the transmission rollout, and basically the moment a new power line is completed, there's a rush of the wind and solar farm companies to saturate the capacity of that line as soon as they can. And the opportunities are being constrained by lack of power lines to bring the solar and wind into the cities.
Federal Labor has committed $20 billion to create a government-owned entity that will rebuild and modernise the grid.
It's a holistic approach that we have. Only a Labor government will ever deal with the sort of industry policies that are required as we transition to a clean energy economy.
The federal government says it's committed $250 million to transmission projects, but has ruled out a national body to update network infrastructure.
But there's lots of people who have said for a long while that all planning should be taken over by the federal government, but that would be a massive change in the way our federation works. State governments do planning.
It's not just the high voltage lines that need updating. The distribution network is designed to be one-way only. There's currently little benefit for farmers with mid-scale renewables to feed back into the grid.
We need to modernise the grid to enable more farmers to be able to earn a secondary income from these types of developments.
Karen Stark and her husband John Elder use solar to power their cotton irrigation, but when they're not irrigating, it goes to waste.
Our 500 kilowatts of solar that we have out in the paddock is not connected to the grid because our grid is quite constrained at the moment. So we have export limits here that you could only feed in 30 kilowatts of solar back in to get a feed-in tariff. So it is a bit of a limitation on farmers being able to have a larger system like ours.
It's all about getting the energy transformation right.
Things need to be designed in a way that considers agriculture and considers the land, but also we need to be innovative in the future to think about how we can combine the energy development as well as the farming in positive ways.
What do you reckon? How's the yield?